I bought my mom a house. I paid every bill, utilities, groceries, internet for the kids to stream their shows. I made sure she never had to worry. Not about money. Not about anything. I wanted her to have peace. But at a family gathering, in front of everyone, she said, "You give us nothing but headaches." The words hit harder than I expected. The dining room fell silent, everyone avoiding eye contact. My uncle stirred his coffee. My aunt shifted in her seat. My cousins stared at their phones like they'd just discovered them. And no one said a word in my defense. It stung. It cut deeper than I was ready to admit. I bought this house for her. I paid for everything. I did it so she didn't have to choose between a warm home and a full fridge. But in that moment, she threw me aside like I was nothing. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting to keep my expression neutral. I wouldn't let them see how badly it hurt. "That's not fair, Mom," I finally said, keeping my voice even. "I'm the one paying for this house, the bills, the food. And you never let us forget it," she snapped, cutting me off. "You act like we should be grateful, but a real daughter wouldn't keep score." A real daughter. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. My gaze swept across the room. Mark, my brother, was sitting back, arms crossed, face unreadable. His wife avoided my eyes. My cousins stayed silent. Not one of them stood up for me. I took a deep breath and stood up. "Okay," I said, pushing my chair back with purpose. My mom raised an eyebrow. "Okay, what?" "Okay," I repeated. "If I'm such a burden, then I'll stop being one." The room went stiff. My mother's lips parted, expecting me to argue, to beg for her approval. But I was done begging. I'm done paying for everything. I'm done funding this whole family. I won't keep doing it while being treated like an outsider. My uncle coughed awkwardly. My aunt's eyes widened in shock. Mark leaned forward. "Hold on." "No," I cut him off. "You all sat here and let her say that to me. You let her make me feel like I was the problem. Fine, let's see how you all do without me." I grabbed my purse, turned on my heel, and walked out. As soon as I stepped outside, the panic hit me. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I'd done it. I had set a boundary. But instead of feeling liberated, I felt empty. I drove away, turning off my phone as the first text came in. "Mom, come back inside. You're overreacting." "Mark, what are you doing? You can't just leave like that." I didn't look back. For the next few days, the silence was deafening. No calls, no texts, not a word. Then, on the third day, they started. The messages flooded in. "Mom, the electricity bill is due. I hope you're serious about what you said." "Mark, Mom's crying. Do you really want to do this to her?" "Aunt Lisa, honey, families fight, but cutting us off won't solve anything. Please, let's talk." I ignored them all. The guilt tripping quickly turned into anger. "Mom, I can't believe you'd do this after everything I've done for you." "Mark, you're so selfish. Do you think money makes you better than us?" Selfish. The word that's been thrown at me so many times. I let out a bitter laugh and threw my phone onto the bed. Then came the knock at my door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Mark stood on my porch, arms crossed, face twisted in frustration. "You've made your point. Now stop being dramatic and fix this." I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "Fix what?" "You know what," he snapped. "Mom's losing her mind. The bills are stacking up. And you just walk away." "Why is that my problem?" I raised an eyebrow. "Because you're the one who always takes care of it." "Maybe that's the problem," I said quietly. "Maybe it's time for someone else to step up for a change." Mark scoffed. "Like who?" "Mom, she doesn't work." "Me? I've got my own bills." I raised an eyebrow. "And I don't?" "You make more than all of us," he shot back. "It's not the same." There it was. The real reason they felt entitled to my money. "Just because I make more doesn't mean I owe you anything," I said. "I bought that house for Mom. I covered every expense, bills, groceries, emergencies. And instead of thanks, I get called a burden." Mark rubbed his face, frustration evident. "She didn't mean it. She was upset." I shook my head. "No, she meant it. And the worst part? No one defended me. Not even him. The silence between us grew thick. I saw it, the flicker of guilt in Mark's eyes. You don't get it, he muttered, his voice quieter than before. Mom's scared. She doesn't know how to handle things without you. Then maybe she should have thought about that before she humiliated me in front of the entire family. I snapped, stepping back into the house. I'm done, Mark. Figure it out. With that, I shut the door behind me. The fallout. The following week was utter chaos. Mom called everyone, every relative she could think of, and spun her version of the story. She abandoned us. She's punishing me just because I asked for respect. She's selfish, greedy, only cares about money. Some relatives sided with her immediately, sending me messages about how family is everything and how I'd regret this one day. But others, they started seeing through the cracks. Aunt Lisa, sweetheart, I didn't know you were paying for everything. That's not fair to you. Cousin Rachel, wait, hold on, you bought the house, and she still treats you like that? Mom hadn't anticipated people asking questions. And when they did, her perfect little victim act started to crumble. By the end of the month, she finally called me. Not to apologize, but to beg. Please, just cover the bills for one more month. We're struggling. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and gave her the same response I'd given Mark. Figure it out. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I hadn't known in years, freedom. The lies began to crumble. Days turned into weeks. I expected my mom to come around eventually. I thought maybe she'd apologize, admit she'd been wrong, or at least acknowledge everything I'd done for her all these years. But she didn't. Instead, she doubled down. Soon, I started hearing things through the family grapevine. How I turned my back on my own mother. How I had forced her into financial ruin. How I was so full of myself, thinking money could replace love and family. And my personal favorite, how she had raised a selfish, ungrateful daughter who abandoned the woman who gave her life. It was almost laughable. I had done everything for her, bought her a house, paid every bill, made sure she never had to worry. And the moment I stopped, I became the villain of the story. But here's the thing about lies. They fall apart when the truth surfaces. The truth was coming. It started with small cracks. Aunt Lisa, who had been one of Mom's biggest supporters, called me late one evening. Sweetheart, I went to visit your mom today. Oh? She didn't look like she was struggling to me. I frowned. What do you mean? I mean she had a brand new dining set, and she was wearing a new gold bracelet your brother bought her. My stomach churned. She'd been telling everyone she was struggling, that the bills were piling up, that she couldn't afford food, that the electricity was about to be shut off. Aunt Lisa sighed. Well, if that's the case, she sure isn't acting like it. And it wasn't just Aunt Lisa. Other family members started noticing the inconsistencies. How Mark still had money for weekend trips. How Mom would play the victim one moment and then post pictures of herself at expensive brunches the next. Then, the real bombshell came. Cousin Rachel called me one evening. Hey, do you know how much your mom is charging Mark for rent? What? I asked, confused. I heard from his wife that he's only giving her $100 a month. My heart dropped. $100? I had been paying everything for that house, thousands of dollars a month. And now, Mark, who had a full-time job, was giving her pocket change. $100. I had spent my life being the family's personal bank, shouldering their burdens, sacrificing my own comfort so they could live easily. And now, the moment I walked away, they weren't struggling. They were choosing to act like they were, because they expected me to come crawling back. The showdown. That Sunday, I walked back into the house for the first time in weeks. The moment I entered, Mom's face twisted into an expression I knew too well, displeasure mixed with something else, triumph. She thought I was here to apologize. Mark leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, that smug look on his face. I almost turned around and left. But instead, I took a deep breath and set my purse down. I want to make something clear, I said, my voice calm but firm. I am never paying for anything in this house again. Mom scoffed. Oh please, we all know you'll come crawling back. You need us. Mark smirked.
Yeah.
You're not going to let mom suffer. We all know that. I tilted my head and gave him a long, unflinching look. How much rent are you paying, Mark? The smirk vanished. What? You heard me. He glanced at mom, then back at me. That's none of your business. Oh, but it is my business, I said, stepping closer. I've been hearing some interesting things lately, like how you've been giving mom a whole $100 a month. Mom stiffened. Who told you that? Does it matter? I folded my arms. You've been telling the whole family that you're struggling, that you're on the verge of financial ruin, that I abandoned you. Meanwhile, Mark is giving you pocket change while you're out buying gold bracelets. Mark's face turned red. That's fair, reasonable? I cut him off. Because if that's the case, my money should have been more than enough to last you for years. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Silence. For the first time, I let the silence stretch for what felt like an eternity before speaking again. I'm not coming back, Mom, I said quietly. Not to this. Not to being used. Not to being disrespected. I held her gaze. I was your daughter, not your retirement plan. If you can't see that, then that's no longer my problem. For the first time, I saw something in her expression that I'd never noticed before. Not just shock. Not just anger. Fear. Because she really knew that I wasn't bluffing this time, and she had no backup plan. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. Mark finally snapped out of his silence. You're just going to leave us like this? I turned back, meeting his eyes, my voice calm but firm. You left me a long time ago, I replied, and with that, I walked out, leaving them to clean up the mess they'd created, and this time, I didn't look back. For years, my phone had been flooded with messages, requests for money, guilt trips, complaints about how I never did enough, but after that night, it was as if I had been erased from their world. No desperate texts from Mom, no angry rants from Mark, nothing. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I thought I'd feel guilty, that maybe I'd wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I had made a mistake, but instead, every morning felt lighter, as if I'd stepped out of a cage I hadn't realized I'd been locked in. I went out with friends without calculating how much was left after paying Mom's bills. I bought myself new clothes without hearing her voice in my head, telling me that spending on myself was selfish. I even booked a trip, something I'd never allowed myself to do because every spare cent had gone into keeping my family comfortable. And yet, despite my silence, I knew they were struggling. Cousin Rachel kept me updated, though I never asked. Mark's losing it. Mom told him he has to pay the full rent now. And he's furious. I smirked. Oh, you mean like a normal adult? Exactly. He's been trying to guilt-trip the rest of the family into helping, but no one's falling for it. Good. And your mother? Rachel hesitated. She's still trying to save face, but the cracks are starting to show. She's stopped going out as much. She's telling everyone you abandoned her, but even Aunt Lisa's starting to question her story. People are realizing she had it good with you and threw it all away. That should have made me feel vindicated, but it didn't, because deep down, I knew that no matter how bad things got for her, my mother would never admit she was wrong. She'd rather struggle. She'd rather lose everything than admit she'd pushed away the one person who had done everything for her. And honestly, that wasn't my problem anymore. 3 months passed before I finally heard from her again. It was late. I had just gotten home from dinner with friends, something I'd been doing more of lately. It felt good to have a life outside of my family's constant demands. My phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. I could ignore it. I should ignore it, but, against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? Silence. A long moment. Then, a heavy sigh. You really meant it, didn't you? I swallowed. Yes, Mom, I did. Another silence. Then a bitter laugh. I didn't think you had it in you. Well, I did. So, that's it? You just, what? Pretend we don't exist? I sighed, rubbing my temple. I don't pretend anything, Mom. You made it clear how you saw me. I was just the one paying the bills. And the second I stopped, you threw me away. I didn't. You did. Silence. Then finally, she spoke. I'm struggling. I closed my eyes. I know. You could fix this. Just help out a little. Just for a few months, until we figure things out. No. Her voice hardened. You're really going to let your own mother suffer? And there it was. The guilt. The same weapon she had used my entire life. But this time, it didn't work. Mom, I said quietly, I already gave you everything I could, and it was never enough. It was never going to be enough. If I gave you money now, what would change? In 6 months, you'd be right back where you are now, asking for more. It's different this time. No, it's not, I said, cutting her off. And deep down, you know that. She was silent. You never planned for a future without me paying for everything. I continued. And now you're realizing that was a mistake. But it's not my mistake to fix. Her breath hitched slightly. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But when she spoke again, her voice was cold. Fine. If you want to be heartless, then don't expect to be welcomed back when you finally come to your senses. I let out a slow breath. I won't. And for the first time in my life, I hung up on her. I stared at my phone for a long time after the call. I had expected to feel guilty, to feel that old, familiar ache in my chest, the one that had kept me tied to my family for so long. But all I felt was peace, because this time, I hadn't let her manipulate me. This time, I had chosen me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. Weeks passed. Then months. I kept waiting for the guilt to creep in. For the crushing loneliness my mother had promised I would feel. But it never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waking up with a tight knot of anxiety in my chest, wondering what financial crisis my family was going to throw at me next. I wasn't checking my bank account every day, calculating how much I could spare before they came asking for more. I was free. And I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I started traveling, something I had never allowed myself to do before. I wandered through the cobbled streets of Rome, sipping espresso at a sun-drenched cafe, letting the warmth seep into my skin. I hiked through misty mountain trails, breathing in the crisp air, feeling my body move for the joy of it, not out of obligation or exhaustion. I decorated my apartment, filling it with colors and textures that reflected me, not a life shaped by guilt and sacrifice. I went out with friends, laughing until my stomach ached, spending money on myself without justification, without the nagging voice in my head reminding me of someone else's needs. And the best part, I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. No one was watching my every move, tallying up what I owed them, waiting for me to fall back into line. For the first time, I wasn't the family bank. I wasn't the fixer. I was just me, and it was the best decision I had ever made. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, sipping a glass of wine, my phone buzzed. Mark. My finger hovered over the decline button, but curiosity won out. I answered. Hey, he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Hey. A long pause. Then, finally, I screwed up. I blinked. Come again? He let out a heavy sigh. I should have had your back that night at the family dinner when Mom humiliated you. I stayed silent, letting him speak. I thought you'd always be there, no matter how much we took advantage of you. And then, when you left, I had to step up. I realized just how much you were doing. He exhaled sharply. I'm sorry. I gripped my wine glass a little tighter. What changed? Mark let out a dry chuckle. Mom did. What do you mean? She's still playing the victim, still telling everyone you abandoned her. But now that I'm the one covering things, she's treating me the same way. Nothing is ever enough. The more I give, the more she expects. I sighed. Yeah. I know the feeling. I don't know how you did it for so long. Because I thought I had to. Silence stretched between us before he cleared his throat. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just needed to say it. I was a crappy brother. And I see that now. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive him. But for the first time in years, he wasn't demanding something from me. He wasn't trying to guilt me. He was just apologizing. And maybe, for now, that was enough. A few weeks later, another call came, this time from an unknown number. Something in my gut told me to answer. You think you're better than us now? I sighed. Hello to you too, Mom. You've embarrassed this family. She spat, walking away like that. Everyone knows what you did. Oh, and what exactly did I do? My voice was eerily calm. You left me to suffer. Suffer? I repeated. You mean like how I worked tirelessly to keep you comfortable for years? How I paid for everything while you sat back and judged me? I raised you. she snapped. And I repaid you, I said firmly, more than any child ever should have to. Silence. You think you don't need me, she finally said, her voice quieter. I know I don't need you, I corrected, and that scares the hell out of you, doesn't it? More silence. Then, she did what she always did. She laughed. You'll be back, she said. One day, you'll realize that family is all you have. And when that day comes, don't expect me to be waiting with open arms. I smiled. I won't. And for the last time, I hung up. A year later, I sat on a quiet beach, watching the waves roll in. I had moved to a new city, built a new life, found happiness in the quiet freedom of living for myself. My mother had tried a few more times to pull me back in, same manipulation, same guilt. I never answered. Mark and I were talking again, slowly rebuilding something real. I wasn't sure if we'd ever be close, but at least now, there were no expectations, no obligations, just the beginnings of something honest. And me? I was finally, truly happy. No more being the family's safety net, no more being the scapegoat, no more living my life for everyone else. I took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs. I was free. And I was never going back.